Welcome back to the Freedom First podcast. We are your hosts, Blaine Smotherman
and Eric Hearn.
This episode is brought to you in part by Jeffries Firearms Training.
Shooters making shooters. For more information, contact owner Ronnie Jeffries on Instagram at Jeffries Firearms Training.
Are you looking for a wide variety of firearms, ammunition, and equipment? NAG Industries is a premium, local, veteran, and family-owned company in Bakersfield, California. They offer expertise in sales, repair, enhancement, and service of a wide variety of firearms, ammunition, and equipment with a focus on law enforcement and government agencies. For more information, you can visit them on Instagram at in.a.g_industries, through email info@nagindustries.com, or you can give them a call at 661-364-9726. NAG Industries, pride in what we do. Welcome. You have now entered the Freedom First podcast,
where we have conversations with some of the most interesting human beings on the planet.
People who live and breathe in Freedom First mentality. Our guest on today's episode is a retired professional MMA fighter who competed as a featherweight in the UFC, with wins over current lightweight champ Charles Oliveria, Darren Elkins, Diego Sanchez, Cub Swanson, and many more. He is the youngest of 6 brothers and was a college wrestler, earning All-American honors at the NCAA Division III Men's Wrestling Championships at 157 pounds. During his college wrestling career, he racked up over 100 wins. Recently, he retired from the UFC in 2020 after his Fight of the Night win bonus over Bill Algeo. He currently runs and operates UFC Gym Naperville in Naperville, Illinois, where he trains and coaches MMA fighters and other athletes. His father is Cuban and his mother is of Mexican descent. The flags of these two countries are often displayed on his clothing during his fights and when he walks out. His father was the leader of a Cuban resistance movement under the Castro regime, eventually managing to hide in the Brazilian embassy in Cuba before escaping to the United States. Him and his father are major voices and advocates against the violent, oppressive communist regime in Cuba. On this episode, he shares his father's story of escaping Cuba and what is currently happening in Cuba with the violence between the oppressive Cuban government and the Cuban people. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ricardo the Bully Lamas. Welcome back to the Freedom First podcast. Today we have on former UFC fighter, retired featherweight, Ricardo Lamas. And thank you so much for joining us, Ricardo. We appreciate it, taking your time. And welcome to the show.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So, Ricardo, tell us a little bit about yourself for those who don't know who you are. Obviously, it's a hard name not to remember because obviously you're such a stud. But give us kind of a brief background of you, where you came from, a little bit of that. So.
Sure. I was born and raised in the Midwest, here in Chicago, Illinois. Grew up kind of being a huge fan of martial arts. And when I was a kid, I was like really obsessed with Bruce Lee. So that's what kind of got me started in my martial arts career. And from a little kid, I did little classes here and there of karate and stuff. And then when I was about 9 or 10 years old, me and my older brother bugged my parents enough to finally sign us up at a Taekwondo school. So I did that for a few years, but then kind of stepped away from it because it was fun. I really liked it, but we were at one of those schools where they didn't really take us out to compete. It was just kind of going to practice and learning the forms, learning the kicking and punching combinations, and basically learning all that and then testing for your next belt. It wasn't until I hit high school that I started wrestling because the same brother who did Taekwondo with me actually joined the team. He was a couple years older than me. So he'd come home and like bend me up into a pretzel every day after practice. So I was like, all right, I got to learn this just to defend myself. So when I hit high school, I joined the team, and that's when I really fell in love with competition. That was kind of the first taste I ever got of competition. So I wrestled in high school. I wasn't very good when I started, but I stuck with it. And my ultimate goal in high school was to like make it to the state tournament and qualify for state. It never happened, but because of that, it kind of like continued that desire inside me to strive for better things. So I decided to wrestle in college, and I ended up at a Division III school right outside Chicago here called Elmhurst College. It's Elmhurst University now. They just switched it, and I wrestled there for 4 years. I became an All-American. They inducted me into the Hall of Fame a few years after I graduated. And when I graduated, I initially stayed on to help coach the team. So I was an assistant coach. And after about a year of doing that, I just noticed that sitting on the sidelines and coaching these guys, I still wanted to be in there. I still wanted to be competing. And at that time, I was working at a health club just at the local park district here. And there was another trainer there who had a background in boxing and Muay Thai. And me and him would talk all the time. And I told him how, I've been a fan of the UFC probably ever since I was around the same time I started doing Taekwondo, because my brother brought home, I'm the youngest of six boys,
gotcha.
guys. So when I say like my brother,
Yeah.
I got a lot of brothers. So another one brought home like one of the first UFC events, and that was back when it was like no weight classes, no gloves, no rules.
Did you guys
and
pick it up at Blockbuster? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Did you guys pick it up at Blockbuster?
No, that's fine. He got it from a friend of his. So they made like a copy of it, and he came home and was like, "You guys got to see this. It's like illegal in most states. These guys are beating the shit out of each other, no gloves or anything."
It's awesome.
As soon as I saw that, and then like seeing Hoist Gracie, just beating all these guys, he was like the most frail looking dude, and me, I was always like one of the smallest kids in my classes growing up, so that appealed to me right away. I'm like, this little dude is beating all these bigger guys. So
beating these heavyweights, submitting these heavyweights and whatnot.
Yeah. Just seeing how like the little guy goes in and just destroys everybody. That really appealed to me. So I always wanted to do MMA, like going through life. I remember being in high school and like buddies would come sleep over, would be like lifting weights in my basement, like at 1 o'clock in the morning because we didn't have anything better to do, and watching those UFC fights. And I remember like telling specifically a buddy of mine, Kevin Madorn, I remember telling him like, you're going to see me in there one day. And that we were like freshmen in high school. So fast forward to after college, and I'm working at this park district, and I'm telling this guy how I always wanted to fight. And I've been a fan of the UFC. So he's like, all right, well, come learn the stand-up game, because I was already a great wrestler. So it started with that, man. And just kind of, I thought it was going to be like maybe one amateur fight and then get it out of my system and I'll be done with it. But anybody who's done this sport knows how addictive that winning feeling gets. So like after that first amateur win, I wanted another, then I wanted to turn pro, then I wanted to go for a belt, and then it just kept snowballing into what it is now.
Yeah. And you beat Charles Oliveria, which is the current lightweight champion of the world. So, I mean, I remember the fight with Max, the fight with Max Holloway. When you guys threw down, and I mean some iconic moments. So I think that leads us in. I want to jump. That's a perfect segue into the Freedom Minute, because the first question was, what is the most memorable fight in your career?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because there's so many. Like even before I hit the big stage, but I remember like being in a part of my career where I'm coming up the ranks, and like people around my area starting to talk about me and other guys. So there's this one other guy around the area. So me and him were probably the two best guys in the Midwest. And there's a title fight. It was my first pro title fight. The guy's name was Cal Ferry. He was undefeated. He was like 9-0. Remember when I told you that I never made it to state in wrestling? He wrestled in Illinois too. He was a 3-time state champ, freshman, sophomore, junior year. He got in trouble with an athletic violation his senior year, so he couldn't wrestle, but he probably would have won his senior year too. And then he went on to wrestle D1 at University of Illinois. Me and him met up at the IFL tryouts, and we faced off with each other there for the first time. So the IFL tryouts there was a couple different rounds. We did like a grappling round, a striking round, and if you made it past those, you go to an MMA sparring round, and they just pair you up with a random person. So I just happened to be paired up with him, and we put on a show right there at the IFL tryouts. Like everybody was watching us. We were going at it, and so somebody must have seen that, and they decided to book us for a title fight. and it was in his hometown. So the entire arena was just swearing at me when I'm walking to the cage and booing me left and right. I had my little cheering section, but that was it. And it was a good fight back and forth. But I came out on top and I ended up finishing him in the 4th round. And then the entire arena just cleared out and all my people jumped in the cage. So,
Oh shit.
like little things like that coming up in your career are things that you really remember, because I remember that was the turning point of my career where I thought to myself, like, I can take this as far as I want now. And then besides that, there's times in the UFC, my first fight in Chicago when I fought Eric Koch, who was the #1 contender at the time. Obviously my title fight, because that's the highest you can get in the sport without being a world champ. And then like first fight in Mexico that the UFC ever had. So I was a part of that. And, that was a real memorable time too, because, my mother's side of the family is from Mexico. So I got that Mexican blood in me, and I was received very well by the fans down there.
La Raza.
What part of Mexico is your mother from?
La Raza. My mom's from Monterrey.
Okay.
That's awesome.
And I got the opportunity to fight there one time too against Diego Sanchez.
Oh, that's
wow.
awesome.
That's
Heck
not yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
So diving a little more into the freedom minute, I kind of want to ask you the second question. You starting with the conversation about Bruce Lee, I kind of think I may know this answer, but I may be wrong. So if you could fight one person, who would it be? Who is your dream fight?
In any sport, like any
Man.
boxing,
like
MMA, wrestling.
Anyone dead or alive, right?
Dead or alive.
Yeah.
Dead or alive, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce Lee would definitely be up there, but I could probably come up with a better. I'd love to slap Conor McGregor if I ever had the chance. So
There we
obviously
go.
fighting someone like him would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys had some
And
beef,
then
right?
I'd like to travel back to yeah, we had some beef a little while back. It's
Yeah.
all good though.
Y'all good?
It is what it is.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be cool to know what I know now and go back and fight in some of those first UFC tournaments and see what I could do back then.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
That'd be cool.
King of the cage type stuff, it doesn't matter weight class. It's all just,
That's
yeah.
Beginning.
Yeah.
Ends up on top.
All right. So I want to go with this one. If you could give like one sentence advice about how to live life, what would it be? Like short phrase.
Die with no regrets, meaning regretting something that you wish you would have done in life. Not necessarily something, I did that and I regret it. Die like trying everything you ever wanted to try. I think that's kind of the point of life, is figuring out what your passion is, figuring out what you want to do, and go do it, and don't be afraid to do anything.
Oh man,
That's awesome.
That's powerful.
Yeah. So our first question is going to be, so basically, if you can learn from, or if you did learn from one failure, what failure was that, and what did you learn?
To circle back to high school wrestling, and pretty much my entire athletic career, I had these goals that I ultimately didn't reach, but by not reaching them, it kind of catapulted me in bigger goal. And, like I said, I never made it to state in high school, but that pushed me to train harder, to wrestle in college. And then when I got to college, I started beating these guys who were state qualifiers, state placers, state champions. Then I became an All-American. My goal in college was to be a national champ. I fell short of that. But then again, that pushed me to kind of take the next step and be a professional athlete and make it to the highest pinnacle of the sport, in MMA. So I would say that something I learned was that don't let your failures define you, and use them to push past to the next level.
All right, last question to wrap this up. If you could sit down and have a conversation with anyone throughout the history of the world, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
That's man, you guys come up with some deep questions here, huh?
Yeah.
We want some deep answers.
Yeah, I don't know. Off the top of my head, just talking about, because we've been on the topic of all this Cuba stuff, I'd like to talk to maybe my grandparents on my father's side, because I never had the chance to meet them. They both passed away before I was born. So I think that would be really cool to talk to one of them, kind of, ask them about more of our family history, and my dad and uncles as their kids and stuff.
Yeah. And, going with that message, going all the way back, your father, Jose Lamas,
Yep.
what was it like, growing up, and then also your father growing up in Cuba? What was that foundation? What are some of the stories that, you had heard growing up under under Castro and this communist regime in Cuba? What are some of the stories he's told you?
Yeah. So growing up with someone like my dad, he obviously, he saw things and did things in his life at an age that I couldn't even comprehend. All this started happening with the revolution right around the time that he was like a college student. So he was born in 1940. Castro took power in 1959, which made my dad 19 years old, or actually 18, gonna be 19 when Castro took power. So like when I was 18, 19 years old, all I was worried about was like what party was going on the weekend, what girls were single, and just to think about my dad was out there doing these things, trying to fight for the freedom of his people under a communist dictatorship just kind of blows my mind. So growing up with someone like that, like he was kind of strict with us, very against like the whole partying scene and all that, which is totally understandable because what he went through and what he saw is just polar opposites of what me and my brother saw growing up here. But he's a man of ideals and values that would die for those ideals and values at any time. He's that strong in his beliefs. And people like him are hard to come by nowadays. And the saying is that you know tough times make hard men, and easy times make weak men. My father was a product of tough times, and he's a very hard man, and hard in the sense that he's a very good man. He's a hard worker. Everything he does, he's very passionate about. Um, so he was a great role model to have growing up, and I just hope I can be half the dad that he was to me and my brothers.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then you just continue about how you talk about how your dad's a fighter, and then you think about you and you're a fighter, and totally different aspects because you guys are both fighters mentally, you physically as well. What kind of role did your dad have like in your fighting career, and what was his mentality as you were up and coming?
Yeah, so when we started like wrestling, my dad was when I was a kid. To get back, he was about him being a hard worker. I remember being a kid, and he worked at a TV station here in Chicago, a Spanish TV station, which eventually converted into Telemundo, which everybody knows
Oh,
that
nice.
station.
Right. Yep.
He was the general manager, and he was at work all the time. I remember being a kid, and sometimes I wouldn't even see him. I'd see him maybe in the morning when he dropped me off for school, and then I wouldn't see him till the next morning because he'd just be at work all day long. Um, but towards like when I hit junior high, he split off from the TV station, so he was no longer working there anymore. So he had kept more time on his hands. He didn't really get involved in our athletic career until probably the end of my sophomore year of high school, and not because he didn't want to, but I don't think he really understood the sport of wrestling. He didn't like the whole weight cutting aspect. My brother actually joined the team in secret because my parents didn't want him to, so he joined anyway. And then when I joined, about towards the end of the season, my sophomore year, my dad started coming around to the meets and filming a little bit. And then after my sophomore year season was over, I was talking to him and I was like, I really want to go watch the state tournament. And he was like, okay, we'll go. So me and him went, just me and him. We drove down to the University of Illinois to watch the state tournament. And after that, I was absolutely hooked, like on the sport. That's when I kind of really started training all year round after seeing these kids. Like, it was just so cool. They're in this huge arena, the spotlights around them, they're down there wrestling. The entire arena is packed and cheering for them. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to experience that. So that's when I really started to train all year round and really improve in the sport of wrestling. And then from pretty much that day on, my dad never missed a wrestling match. He was at every meet. He'd videotape every match. When I got to college, he'd actually travel with the team, and he would film everyone's match. And then after the season, he'd go through and separate everybody's matches onto their own personal tape. And he'd go through it in real time. So he sat through the whole season, and then he sat through the whole season again when he was making everybody's videotapes. And so when I graduated and I eventually told him that I wanted to try MMA, at first he did not like the idea at all. He referred to it as human cockfighting, actually. So
some people still do.
Yeah, some people still do. But I told him, I was like, listen, I know you may not approve of it, but I'm gonna do it anyway, and I'd love to have you there at the first fight. And he was a nervous wreck. And after my first fight was actually the first time my dad ever offered to buy me and my brothers a round. Yeah, I think he needed a drink after that fight. So yeah, and then ever since then, man, he turned into my number one fan, and he's actually like a fan of MMA and the UFC now, and he'll come over and watch fights with me. So he's been my number one fan since I really got serious about athletics.
Yeah, I mean, coming from your dad's background, you know, having to literally fight for his life, you know, wrestling has that mindset and that mentality. Like, you're weight cutting all the time. You know, you have to be a badass to wrestle. And as you go through that, you know, that mentality, and you transfer it to MMA, did he kind of see that? Like, man, like, this is tough shit. Like, this is hard mentally, physically.
Yeah, he definitely saw that. You know, I think he loved the ideals and ethics that the sport of wrestling kind of teaches you, because it's really one of those things where you get out what you put into it. So the harder you work, the more rewards that you'll eventually reap. And you know, there's a saying like, once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy. And it's kind of true, because once you've gone through 8 seasons I went through, right? Freshman through senior year and of high school and college. And it's a long season. It's a tough season. It's mentally draining, physically draining. And, you know, it's true. Once you've gone through that, it makes everything else in life a lot easier.
Right. And I mean, if you look at whether it's the UFC or, you know, Pride back in the day, Bellator, the most champions, you know, have been wrestlers or have a wrestling background for the most part. And it just, that tenacity you have to be a wrestler, you know, that no quit, you know, mindset.
Yeah. It's the work ethic that wrestling teaches you. You know, you have to push yourself every day, and you have to put the time and the work in. Otherwise, you're just not going to be successful. So I think, you know, a lot of wrestlers, when they transfer over to MMA, wrestling is already a one-on-one combat sport, right? So the mentality is there, the work ethic is there. The training sessions are actually a wrestling training session is probably harder than an MMA training session, because there's a lot of other things that go into MMA. You know, hitting mitts and stuff is fun. Wrestling practices suck ass. I mean, it's just, it hurts from the first minute to the last minute. So wrestling is the hardest sport on the world. I think it's harder than MMA.
Yeah, I remember doing that wrestling in high school and whatnot. And, you know, just the aspect of, like, just the weight cutting alone, you know, like you kind of prepare yourself, you know, going into MMA and going to the UFC or whatever it is. And you don't have to be the most talented athlete to be a great wrestler. You just have to work your ass off. And you've obviously showed that, Ricardo. And backing up a little bit, you know, talking about fighting, you know, I've heard some stories, you know, interviews of yours, post-fights interviews and podcasts you've been on, talking about your dad literally fighting for his life, having, you know, guns pointed at him and whatnot, you know, going back to his childhood and you know, his, just that mindset of him having to literally fight for his life. What are some of the things like he was literally having to fight for back in Cuba?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little about that. When the revolution started, Castro basically used the excuse of another dictator that was in power at the time, Fulgencio Batista. So Fulgencio Batista came into power through a coup d'etat. He just came in, and because he said that he used the claim that the election that was going to be coming up was going to be rigged. So he decided to just assume power through military force. Castro used that as kind of his in and his excuse to rally the Cuban people behind him, because he kept saying that he was going to restore democracy in Cuba, give the power back to the people, hold free elections in 18 months after he gains power, which all became fraudulent. But in the beginning, he had a lot of people behind him. My father was kind of on the fence about it. He had his doubts, but he filled out this form that was kind of like an application to go up and help the revolution that was hid out in the mountains in Cuba, called La Sierra Maestra. So his application was actually accepted. So he went up as a volunteer, and what he went up to volunteer for was to teach some of the farmers up there how to read and write, who were illiterate. When he got there, he saw things that he didn't like, and he actually was expelled from there because he wasn't doing what some of those soldiers were kind of forcing him to do. So he came down. Shortly after that, he decided that there was no way for him to fight the regime kind of in a legal fashion, because everything he tried to do got shut down. He wrote a news article that he tried to bring to a news outlet, and they basically kind of tore it up, threw it out. And my dad said something back mouthy to the guy. The guy pulled a gun on him and took him to the edge of the stairs and kicked him down the stairs out of the building. So after that altercation, he said that he knew that he had no other means of fighting the regime legally, that he had to go into the underground. So he joined a movement that was called the 30th of November movement. Frank Pais was a martyr who fought against Batista, but died. So he was the head of the student sector, of the national student sector of that movement. He was involved in propaganda. So most of the things he did were nonviolent, right? Like they had an underground newspaper that they would print and distribute out to the people. He's told me about stories of other little operations they did. Like there's a theater in Havana, and there was a play going on. And at one point in the play, all the lights in the theater shut off, so it's pitch black. So they kind of timed that, and him and the other members of his movement, got tickets to the play. They went, and they were all sat in different sections and on different balconies. So when all the lights went off, they all had a stack of pamphlets, and they threw it over the balcony so that when the lights turned back on, it was all showering down, all the pamphlets. And it was basically, stuff on the pamphlets was like anti-revolutionary propaganda, talking about just condemning the government and Castro's revolution. So because of that, the police showed up, and they're running around trying to find out who threw the pamphlets. And all my dad's people were spread out, and all of them were telling the cops, I saw who did it, they're up there. And then, obviously the people that are up there saying, I saw who did it, they're down there. So the police ended up arresting so many people that they had to let everybody go, because they almost ended up arresting like everybody that was in attendance at the theater. Wow. So he did a lot of stuff like that. But the main point of the underground, right, was eventually moving towards a revolt to Fidel Castro. So there were times where they'd have to go out sometimes, and there was one time he said that they were going out to look for arms, right? They were looking for weapons, and they were given kind of some advice on where to find them. And the incident that he got involved in that made him leave the underground and leave Cuba was that they were going to look for these arms. So to do this, they had to steal a car, because they couldn't use their own car, because if they were to get caught or whatever, nothing could be traced back to them. Basically, when they did an operation in a car, they had to burn it afterwards. So they didn't want to burn one of their own cars, so they had to steal one. There's a friend of theirs that was kind of an expert in the stealing cars thing, but the guy kept putting it off. So my dad and a couple of the other people were kind of getting tired of waiting for him, and they're like, we have to go do this now, so we got to go get a car. So they came up with the idea to steal a taxi. When they were in the process of doing it, apparently the taxi driver had a gun in the car, went to pull it, and there was a shootout that happened. Two friends of my father got shot. One of them was shot in the back and paralyzed. Actually, my father might have been the one in friendly fire to have shot his friend, who was shot in the back. So he was, he was there. He was trying to get them out of the car, and he heard the soldiers coming down the street, like the marching. They're all, coming towards the incident of what happened. My father's friend told him to go. I'm all right, just go. So my dad, instead of running away in the other direction of where the soldiers were coming from, something in his head told him to go towards the soldiers. He had a gun in each hand that he had in his pockets as he was walking. He walked right past the soldiers and was like, "You guys need to call the police. There's, something happened over there." And the guys just let him go. So after that,
Shit.
my father was so just mentally destroyed about what happened and what he had done, that he decided to leave the underground. So he met with a friend of his who was his second in command in his group, which we're still very good friends with this guy. This guy's older brother married a woman, and my father was friends with them, and they had kids. They eventually came to the U.S., they had kids growing up, and they were like cousins to us growing up. But anyways, my father's second in command, he met with him at a park in Havana, handed him all the files he had that had to do with their group, with their underground movement, and said, "Here, take these files. I'm leaving." And eventually my father went and sought refuge in the Brazilian embassy in Cuba. And he was there for about 6 months, and then went to Puerto Rico, and from Puerto Rico came to Chicago. Shortly after he left, like I said, they were building up to a revolt. They planned this revolt to happen on a certain day. So they were getting ready to gear up for that revolt. The day before that revolt was supposed to happen, everyone in my father's underground group was arrested, including my father's second in command. Within 21 days of his capture, he was arrested, he was charged, convicted, judged, and sent to the firing squads and assassinated in 21 days. So if my father would have stayed, that would have been his fate,
Holy shit.
Luckily for, I don't know. Yeah. So that's why I say that when he fought for, and that's just a little bit, there are other stories
Right.
where he was a hair away from being apprehended. And if he would have been sent to the firing squads.
It's crazy to think about the instinct your dad had, to, walk past the soldiers with two guns in his pockets,
Right.
And to something in his mind said, "Hey,
Yeah.
I need to go this way. And I think this is the way that's going to, I trust this way." And then he goes and says, "Hey, I need to get out of here. It's about time." And just the instinct alone, is just a crazy thing to think about. You don't want to call it luck. It's more of instinct, because of the fact that he knew what he was getting himself into, for one, and he knew, he was strategic in what he did, and obviously they had a plan, and it's insane to think about,
Yeah, just the bravery alone,
Yeah, even he says to this day, he's like, "I don't know what told me to go that way, but I did." And luckily it worked out, because if you think about it, any criminal, anybody who does something wrong, and see a bunch of police coming towards them, they would never run toward, it's just,
Right.
it's crazy to think about. And that was just his fate,
So
I don't know how else to explain it.
back in what was it, 62, the Cuban Missile Crisis, was he already in the United States at that time, or was he still over there?
No, so he came when he got to the United States. It was in 1963.
Okay.
So like I said, he had to spend a lot of time kind of hid out in the Brazilian embassy in Cuba. Right. I believe it was about 6 months, and then from there he flew to Puerto Rico, and from Puerto Rico he flew straight to Chicago, because my uncle was already here, living in Chicago at the time. So I think he might have been either in the Brazilian embassy or in Puerto Rico during the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Okay. So your uncle, came over to the United States as well. How much of your family, was still over there, or do you still have family in Cuba?
If I do have family in Cuba, it's very distant family.
Okay.
That I don't really know of.
Right.
My father's immediate family, so my father's oldest brother was the one who was here in Chicago. And actually, my father was the youngest of three. So the oldest brother was here in Chicago. My father went to the Brazilian embassy, then to Puerto Rico, then Chicago. And then their middle brother, my uncle Rafael, was actually a political prisoner for almost 10 years under the regime. And that was because he joined a different movement with my father's uncle, and they were actually apprehended, and he spent almost 10 years as a political prisoner.
Right. And now, I mean, to what we're looking at right now today, a lot of similarities that we're seeing or hearing from, back when your father was in Cuba. So I know you're a huge activist, advocate, posting on Instagram and doing more. Your father as well, got to listen to him on the podcast last week. So what's going on right now in Cuba? There's a lot of people saying, as you know, oh, it's because of, the whatever, everything else that America's doing.
Embargo and blockade. Yeah.
The embargo, the blockade. But there's a lot more to it than that. So what are you seeing? You are a Cuban American. You're also Mexican American as well. So what are you seeing and what's going on in Cuba right now?
What we're seeing is the results of 62 years of living under oppression and under communist dictatorship. The people have just had enough, and you can only push someone so far until they reach their breaking point. And I think that's what we're seeing. They've been deprived of so much. They've lived under such horrible conditions that now they've lost their fear of the government. They've lost their fear pretty much of dying, and they're going out into the streets and they're protesting and they're demanding their freedom from the Castro regime. So, all these people are saying that it's the fault of the U.S. and the embargo and the blockade. Number one, Cuba, there are other countries that Cuba can trade with. Number two, the way the regime has their economy set up, no matter how much food and how many products are coming in, that system is meant to keep the Cuban poor, hungry, and starving, and so that the people that are in power can maintain control. There's a reason that an average Cuban gets around $20 to $30 a month of if you look at the exchange rate, about 20 to 30 US dollars a month. They're paid in Cuban pesos, which is kind of worthless down there. Yet all the products that are sold in stores are sold in American dollars. So it's just a way of keeping them down, keeping them oppressed, and keeping control. So you can lift the embargo, you can send whatever you want down there. It's going to go through the regime's hands first. The regime elites are going to get a crack at it first. And then maybe it'll trickle down to those Cubans who obey and act nice and praise the regime, right? But when it comes to people who just want their basic human rights, they're still going to be oppressed, and lifting the embargo won't help them at all. They're going to be in the same position that they've been in since 1959.
Right. And you see this rhetoric coming from the current administration that, this is a reaction or a crisis from COVID and so, but as we know, this is from 60 plus years of a communist dictatorship, a communist regime. This isn't just, you throw COVID at it, and all of a sudden they don't have medicine. So the administration, it's crazy to see the rhetoric that they're putting out. They're not even recognizing that this 60 plus years of dictatorship has literally caused what we're seeing right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you look at these protests that are going on in Cuba, these people are going through the streets. They're not screaming vaccines, food, lift the embargo. They're screaming freedom. They're screaming down with the dictatorship. They're calling Diaz-Canel an MFer in the streets. Like that's what they're yelling. They're not yelling anything about an embargo or wanting food or wanting more money. It's they want their freedom and their basic human rights that every person on this earth should be entitled to.
Right. And I mean, it's crazy to see because we literally, in the United States, we bring in immigrants and we bring in people from all over the world, Mexico, Syria, and you can name them, keep on naming them, but they're literally turning these Cubans away. And not to say that, you should go out and into the water, like that's dangerous, but they're literally turning Cubans away and they're shutting down all these methods of communication, which is crazy to see. If we're really going to call ourselves this melting pot, bringing people all around the world into our country, and we're going to turn the Cubans away, doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. We've gone halfway across the world to help people and spread democracy and help people who've had their human rights violated. But literally 90 miles from our shores, it's happening. It's been happening for 62 years, and we need to right that wrong that's been going on. I know, back in the 60s, there was a lot of stuff that went on with the Kennedy administration, and they really kind of goofed up the whole Cuba situation. And I think that's why the U.S. government has kind of backed off. But it's time now. It's time to stand with the people and do what's right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to think about all the humanitarian issues that are going on in Cuba, and it's sad to see, and I hope that something does get done soon. But I kind of wanted to jump back into your UFC stuff, and I know this is a huge problem with Cuba, but we're limited on time, and I kind of want to go more back into your story. Something that kind of stuck in my head a little bit from you were talking about. Was just you going through your childhood and how you weren't the most physically gifted. You were, you didn't make it to state. You were a Division III athlete. What caused that leap from you, going kind of struggling early on to, becoming one of the top athletes of the world?
I think just that tenacity and that stubbornness that I was born with, that I no doubt got from my dad, refusing to give up. No matter how many times I failed, no matter how many times I fell. And, that coupled with other people that kind of came into my life that really helped me out along the way. When I was in high school, I was at a school that wasn't like really well known for wrestling. Our head coach had actually never even wrestled before. He was a football coach. Our assistant coach was a wrestler, but the head coach was not, which is kind of weird. So they were great coaches, right? But I never really had like really awesome coaching until I hit college. And my first experience with that was my first year at Elmhurst. The head coach was Tim Gatto, and then there was an assistant coach from Cuba, actually. So as soon as he found out I was half Cuban, that was it. He like took me under his wing, and he'd stay with me after practice, but then he'd drag my ass out of bed at 5 a.m. 3 days a week to go train with him. So we were training multiple times a day during season. And that was when I really saw my level go up. And then my following year, the head coach had left, and they brought in Steve Marinetti, who was a Division I national champion, Pan American gold medalist. This guy could be coaching at the world level, and people would be lucky to wrestle under him. And we got him at a Division III school. So him coupled with my other coach, Alex, I just saw my level go up every single year. But no matter how good of coaching you have, it all kind of boils down to the athlete themselves. So if you don't put in the work, and if you don't listen to those coaches, and if you don't implement what they're teaching you, then you're not going to grow.
And is that what you think? So like you see the top level dudes, and you were one of them, but you see these guys like Charles Oliveira, Max Holloway's of the world, and Ngannou, all these guys like that are world champions. You could keep naming them. What's the difference between a guy like that, top notch, that gets a title shot and takes advantage of it, and a guy that maybe is a kind of a journeyman that maybe gets there but keeps on losing fights, just doesn't have that edge to be a world champion?
It's that refusal to give up. Like you mentioned Charles Oliveira, and that guy's had his ups and downs in his career. He's lost quite a few times,
Yeah.
But he kept coming back. He didn't give up. He kept improving, and now he's got the strap around his waist. So it doesn't matter what happens to you in the past. And as long as you don't give up, and as long as you keep fighting and keep fighting for that ultimate goal and for what you want, eventually you'll get there. If you want it bad enough, and if you're willing to put in the work that's necessary, you can make anything happen.
Dustin was like that too. He lost some fights early on, and
yeah,
look at where he's at. They're about to. I want to see him fight for a title. How do you think that fight goes? Dustin and Charles Oliveira.
Dustin, yeah. I think it's going to depend on exactly where the fight goes. If it hits the ground, obviously I'd give the edge to Oliveira.
Yeah.
But Dustin is tough, and He's got great wrestling coaches behind him at ATT with Steve Mako and Mike Brown. So his wrestling has really been improving throughout his career. But man, Oliveira's been improving everywhere as well, even in his stand up and his ground game. His striking is really good. So he really impressed me with how he took out Michael Chandler in his last fight.
Yeah, like that division's so stacked. 45, 30, and then 35. The fight this last week in Sanhagen and Dillashaw is.
Oh, that was a great one.
What do you think? How do you think that fight went? Did you agree with the decision?
I keep going back and forth on it. I keep going back and forth on it. It's like it just kind of depends on the judges and like how they see either points or damage done, you know, and how they weigh those two. Because if you look at, they were both scoring a lot of points, but Sanhagen kept giving up these takedowns like round after round to TJ Dillashaw, and I think that's what really made the difference in some of the judges' eyes. But if you just look at damage inflicted, I mean, if you were to stand those two guys up after the fight and ask someone who didn't watch the fight who won, I think 100% would say Sanhagen won that fight because TJ Dillashaw was just busted up.
Yeah.
So I honestly wouldn't have been upset if it would have went the other way. I think it was a coin toss.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, if you look at the face, the damage, Sanhagen, but Dillashaw did a good job of controlling the octagon, but like he didn't do a ton with his wrestling. I mean, he did take him down a couple of times, but I felt like he just didn't do a lot with it. But definitely those divisions, 35, 45, 55, just straight stacked right now. And you fought, you fought against a lot of those guys, Max Holloway and, the current lightweight champ. So, you have a gym, you run and own, a UFC gym. So, retirement seems to be going well. So how is it? Obviously it's probably tough, giving up that competitiveness, going into the cage training all the time, but now you get to, train others, give back and, give back to kids and, everyone in between. So how is it running the gym and how is it being retired now?
Being retired is weird. I thought being retired meant you got to like sit on a rocking chair and whittle wood and do stuff like, but I'm busier now than I was when I was fighting. And that's because, I've kind of put all my eggs into this gym and, just really there every day. And a lot of times, like you see some of these UFC gyms that has like a fighter's name on that brick awning, but they're never there. I'm there 6 days a week. I'm teaching classes. I'm teaching private lessons. So people are actually coming there and learning from me, and I love it. And I think it's the thing that's going to kind of save me from going crazy later in life when I want to compete, because we got a bunch of young guys in there, guys that want to compete, guys that want to fight, and I train with them every day. So that kind of like helps scratch my itch of wanting to go back and punch someone in the face. So hopefully I'll, that'll quell my itch, but never say never in life. I don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Do any of those youngsters give you any trouble?
They're coming up. They're getting better, man. I got to stay sharp with some of them for sure.
Yes, especially from their.
We got some guys, yeah.
Especially when they're learning from me, they kind of learn your tricks and they kind of mirror what you do, and then maybe just kind of fool around and kind of elevate those things maybe a little bit or try different things.
Yeah, that's why you can't
show them all.
You can't teach them everything though. I got to save those little secrets.
Yep.
I mean, you got, so do you still have that itch? I mean, I would imagine you still you get that itch of like going to the cage and you watch these fights.
Yeah, especially like watching a big pay-per-view event, like actually that last Poirier fight. Watching stuff like that gets me riled up, and of course I want to go back and but when I look back on my career and especially the way I ended it, like you can't end it really on a better note. The one thing that would have made it perfect was if I could have done it in a full arena, just hanging up the gloves during COVID in an empty arena. That's like the one thing that I'd like to change if I could, but it's never going to be 100% perfect when you retire from a sport. So I think I gotta leave it the way I left it, going out on a victory, on a fight of the night performance. And after the fight, kind kind of poured my heart out and gave a little speech there that kind of went viral in the Cuban American community, and down in Cuba too. I was getting messages from people. So I feel content on where I left my career.
Yeah, I remember watching that press conference, and just the fact of you hung it up like you said at the right time, coming off a performance of the night. There's a lot of guys that don't, and they do retire and come back, and I feel like more times than not it doesn't end up well. So, I feel like you ended it off, picture perfect career, and you had an amazing career beating so many guys, and just being able to be in the ring with these world champions was I'm sure very amazing. So,
but if you ever do decide to come back, we will not be upset. I promise you.
All right, I'll just have to convince my wife.
That's like, never easy.
No, you're done.
That's never easy.
It's not. And it got way harder after having a family, because I train out of town. Like I go down to Florida, so there were times where they would come with me. But now that like my oldest is 6 years old, so for the last couple of years he's like been in school and like preschool and stuff. So I didn't want to just like tear him out of there and be like, all right, we're gonna go to Miami for a month. So going down there and training by myself became really hard when my family was here in Illinois.
So your oldest is 6 years old. Do you see them, going into wrestling and things like that? Or do you think they would want to?
Yes, my son, all he wants to do, actually, if you look on my social media coming up, I'm gonna make a little video. Me and my son kind of reenacted me and Holloway's ending scene, where he points at the ground. I put some gloves. We both had some gloves on, and he was just throwing haymakers at my face. But all he wants to do is fight and wrestle with me. I don't want to push him into anything too early, though, because I've seen that from a lot of other people, like pushy dads push their kids into wrestling, and then they end up hating the sport. So I want him to want to do it. And right now he does one practice a week at my gym. He'll go and do the wrestling practice. And then apart from that, he's just having fun with dad, and we just roughhouse and kind of introducing him to it that way for now. I don't care if he doesn't compete till he hits high school. I just want him to have fun when he goes and does these things, so that he doesn't hate the sport.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Well, Ricardo, I know it's getting late your time. You're ahead of us a little bit, about 2 hours. For those that don't know, it's about 10 o'clock his time, and I know he's nonstop working. We don't want to take too much more of your time. We appreciate you being on. It's a reflection of who you are. Just a hard worker, always going. So I'm going to leave it to Blaine to give you the Freedom Fighter of the Week, and he's kind of explained to you what that is.
Yeah, so I'll do the Freedom Fighter of the Week, and I do want to touch on one more thing with Cuba at the very end, and then we'll kind of end it from there. But so the Freedom Fighter of the Week is it's someone that's been influential in your life, someone that's helped you get to where you are today. And I know you have a lot of them with your father and your mother and so many people around you. Who's your Freedom Fighter of the Week, Ricardo?
To be cliche, I'd have to say I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am in life if it wasn't for my dad. He gave me, my brothers, literally every opportunity to have a good life, and the sacrifices he made, and that my uncles made, and other people of coming to this country to kind of give us that freedom that they were being denied in their former country. And not only that, but just the support that I had from him. Like I said, he didn't want me to do MMA, but he was there at my first fight, even though he was a train wreck. But ever since then, he supported me in everything that I wanted to do, whether he agreed with it or not. And he literally is a freedom fighter. So how could I not pick him?
Yeah, that's awesome. Perfect. And to kind of end this conversation, and we did talk a lot about Cuba and what's going on right now, what your father went through. So there's a lot of miscommunication out there. A lot of these channels are being censored, whether it's in the United States or also in Cuba. So, I mean, what can people do, number one, to kind of reach out to help, Cubans, and also what does the future look like? What needs to happen for Cuba to actually change?
So people, as far as wanting to help, is just help these Cuban voices be heard. If you see these videos on social media of these people being brutalized by the police in Cuba, share it, spread the word. I actually raise money too, and we've gotten money down to a lot of Cuban dissidents and groups that are opposing the regime. So if people would like to help out in that way, I'm selling these T-shirts that I'm wearing right here. Little, I don't know if you saw it on Timcast, but
Yeah.
little drawing of me peeing on Fidel Castro's grave. So
Love it.
we're selling them, and all the proceeds are going towards Cuban dissidents and groups opposing the regime. So I'm doing it all myself. Just contact me through my Instagram at Ricardo Lamas MMA. Send me a DM, and I'll give you the details on how you can contribute.
Yeah, and you kind of already mentioned it, but one of the last things, where can people find you at? Where can people, reach you at? Your Instagram, your other social media, email. Where can people find you at?
Yeah, so at Ricardo Lamas MMA on Instagram and Twitter. I have a Ricardo the Bully Lamas fan page on Facebook. And that's basically it. If you reach out to me on any of those platforms, I do my best to answer everyone. So
Yeah,
I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you, getting back to us and giving us the grateful opportunity of, for you to actually come on our show. I know you're busy and you have a lot going on, 3 children and a gym and retirement. So we appreciate you coming on, Ricardo. I hope people continue to just look at what's happening in Cuba, fight for what we have here in America, and look at what's happening to these socialist countries, these dictatorships, and hopefully, we can fight back and not bring that here and also help the Cuban people. So thank you, Ricardo. I appreciate it. Eric?
Yeah, I mean, you're truly an inspiration. You're the definition of what our message is. Like you said, freedom fighters. Our motto is freedom first, so what you've explained to us is exactly what we look for in our guests, and you've been an awesome guest, and we appreciate your time. So,
thank you, Ricardo. I appreciate it, and I hope people could reach out to you and look at what your message is and follow you as well. So, thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. We appreciate you and your support of the show. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave feedback on Apple Podcasts.